Romans 1:18 says, the wrath of God is being revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and all wickedness of people who suppress the truth in their wickedness. God becomes angry even with his own chosen servants when we do not have faith or we disobey him. When Moses kept making excuses as to why he could not be God's special spokesman for Israel on behalf of Israel towards the Egyptians. And finally, it says God got angry. Exodus 4 verse 14 says, then the Lord's anger burned against Moses. He wasn't trusting God. 1 Kings 11:9, it says, the Lord became angry when Solomon, because of his heart that had turned away from the Lord, the God of Israel, who had appeared to him twice. If God had appeared to me twice, I don't think I would have acted like Solomon. Of course, I didn't have all the power that he had. A little closer to home for us is the truth that Jesus also became angry, like Father, like Son. Can you sense Jesus' anger towards Satan in the wilderness when, after being tempted for 40 days, in Matthew 4:10, he says, "Begone, Satan." Can you sense his emotion when he says to the Pharisees, "You brood of vipers, how can you who are evil say anything that is good?" Matthew 12:34. Or when he told the Pharisees and the Sadducees, "You are of your father, the devil," John 8:44. Or Jesus, after looking around at them with anger, grieved at their hardness of heart. And you can just sense his anger in that situation in Mark 3, verse 5. When Jesus saw the way that God's temple was being used as a marketplace, he reacted with fierce anger and he drove everybody out of the temple. He actually did this twice. Once at the beginning of his ministry in John 2, verses 14 and 15, he took everybody out of the temple. And then at the close of his ministry, again in great anger and rage, in Matthew 21:12, he threw everyone out of the temple. At times, Jesus also got angry with his disciples for their hardness of heart. In Mark 10:13 and 14, it says people were bringing little children to Jesus for him to place his hands on them, but the disciples rebuked them. When Jesus saw this, he was indignant, saying, "Let the little children come to me." There are also many instances in the Bible in which various people become angered, and their anger seems appropriate or right in the given circumstance. When Nathan, in order to convict David of his sin, told him the story of a poor man's only lamb that was his pet, where a rich man came, took the pet, and killed him. The reaction that David had was that he burned with anger. It seemed righteous to him, and it was. But then Nathan said, "Thou art the man." 2 Samuel 12, verse 5. When Nehemiah relates how the rich Israelites were making the poor Jews into slaves, he reacted to their injustice. Nehemiah 5:6, it says, "Then I was very angry when I heard their outcry," the outcry of the poor Jews. Later, Nehemiah found out that many of the Jews had actually intermarried with pagans when he was gone for a period of time. And he got absolutely furious. He confesses this, Nehemiah 13:25, "I beat some of the men and pulled out their hair." I mean, that's anger. So there is a good or appropriate kind of anger. There is an almost natural instinct, especially among believers, because we get angry at injustices and evil acts of violence against their fellow men. Now, all unbelievers tend to have that same reaction. If you've been listening to the news lately, there was a national outcry against a father and a son who apparently shot down a young black man in cold blood while he was jogging. Now, we're not sure about exactly what happened, but things like that make Americans mad. Because men and women are made in the image of God, there's an appropriate and a right expression of anger against wrongs, against injustices. Christians, as I said, have a greater capacity to feel righteous and holy anger. In this sense, it is our responsibility to get angry for God, to be angry at sin and wickedness because God hates it, and to get mad when God is not being glorified, when he is being maligned and blasphemed. Psalm 69, verse 9, King David sings this: "Zeal for your house consumes me, and the insults of those who insult you fall on me." That was a man of God who was angry at how people treated God. Jesus was quoting those words, by the way, from Psalm 69, when he threw all the money changers out of the temple who were desecrating his Father's house. Zeal for your house consumes me. Psalm 97, verse 10, it says, "Let those who love the Lord hate evil." Now that's very clear. If we don't get angry about evil, I have to wonder what's wrong with us. Because it says, "Let those who love the Lord hate evil." God forbid that we should hate or should not hate the slaughter of millions of unborn babies in our country and around the world. God forbid that we should not hate evil in all of its forms. Jeremiah 8, verse 12 says this: "Are they ashamed of these disgusting actions? Not at all. They don't even know how to blush." That's fairly convicting. This is a statement against priests and prophets at that time who were being indignant, they were not being indignant at all the evil around them. There was no sense of shame on their part. They didn't even know how to blush, it says. God forbid that we should ever get to that point where sin no longer makes us blush. If we have forgotten how to blush at sin, if we can see it and hear it and watch it and it doesn't even faze us, then something is wrong with us. We need Paul's exhortation: be angry. Be angry. The Corinthian Christians had forgotten how to blush at sin among their own members. In Paul's first letter to them, he rebukes them for allowing into their fellowship a man who was sleeping with his stepmother. They shrugged it off, the people in the church. They did nothing. And Paul rebuked them for their indifference to sin in the body of Christ. But he praises them in his second letter for dealing with sin in their body. In 2 Corinthians 7:11, he says, "Just see what this godly sorrow produced in you. Such earnestness, such concern to clear yourselves, such indignation, such alarm, and such a readiness to punish wrong. You showed that you have done everything necessary to make things right." Now let's turn to the other side of this exhortation. Be angry, but do not sin. Here is the necessary caution, for even righteous anger can degenerate into sinful anger. Much more can be said about sinful anger in the scriptures than righteous anger. I mean, this is rather obvious because most of the time when we get angry, it is human anger. It's sinful anger. James 1:19 and 20 says this, and this is an exhortation that I, by the way, keep close to my heart. I have it memorized. And it says this, verse 19 of James 1. "Let everyone be," and then let's skip a little bit, "slow to anger." Then verse 20 says, "For the anger of man does not achieve the righteousness of God." Never has a truer statement been made. This is saying that it is man's normal tendency to be angry, to get angry, but not to be righteous in their anger. It is a human anger, and as such, it is part of the fall of man. And it's wrong. Scripture strongly urges Christians to put off certain kinds of anger. For example, in Colossians 3 verse 8, it says, "But now you must also rid yourselves of all such things as anger, rage, malice, slander, and filthy language from your lips. And similarly, in Ephesians 4:31, it says, get rid of all bitterness, rage, and anger, brawling and slander, along with every form of malice. So how can we diagnose sinful anger and keep it separate from righteous anger? Well, I'm going to give you a few symptoms that alert you to ungodly anger versus godly anger. The first symptom of sinful anger is selfishness. Sinful anger is rooted in selfishness. It always is. It results when one's personal goals have been blocked or one's rights have been violated in their opinion. In other words, we get angry when people don't treat us the way they should. Sinful anger can be subtle and it can be deceptive. When our rights have been violated and our goals have been blocked, we tend to believe that we have every right to be angry. But there's often a fine line between sinful and righteous anger. One might be righteously provoked to anger, but sinfully expresses it in an angry way that is just wrong. In Luke 10, verses 38 through 40, we have an interesting example of Martha's frustration that even led to her rebuking Jesus. Jesus stopped at the house of Martha, Mary, and Lazarus and was warmly greeted by Martha. She was the older sister, and she was a wonderful believer. She was a servant of others. It was absolutely clear. I rather think that she looked at Jesus sort of as her son, because she was older and he was, in his 30s, and she probably wanted to look after him. And this time when he was coming with apparently his disciples, she wanted to cook a banquet for him and for his friends. So she was busy cooking and planning, and she did all of this because she loved Jesus. We should never doubt her love. And you can't condemn her for this motivation of love, which just unfortunately turned into an angry outburst. When Martha was, whether she was a mother or not, she was definitely a motherly woman. And she probably treated Jesus, as I said, like her own son. He was, after all, young. Martha's smothering or her mothering characteristics, I think, can be seen in her rebukes. In other instances, by the way, in the Gospels, Martha is seen as a servant of others, as I mentioned. It is a quality that Christian husbands really love about their wives when they are like this, real servants. It's a quality that children depend on whether they share their appreciation or not for their mother. Jesus, as was his habit, was shown into a large room of the house, and he was teaching there with those that were with him. And in particular, Martha's sister, Mary, was sitting at Jesus' feet, listening and learning from him. There is evidence in the text, but we don't have time to pull it out, that Mary had been helping Martha, but had stopped when Jesus arrived at the house. Mary dropped everything and she went to be with her Lord. And as Jesus points out, Mary did the right thing. Martha is the one who got upset. We can judge just how upset she got by noting a couple of details. It says that Martha had turned the lunch or the dinner, whatever it was, into a major project. She wanted to do her very best for the Lord, and that in and of itself was a good thing. But verse 40 says that Martha was distracted with all of her preparations. I'm sure she felt stressed out and worried that the meal was not going to be served on time. Had she made enough for everyone? Was it going to be on time for this wonderful meal? And it was leading her into a frustration that her work was not going to be done correctly. So notice what she does in verse 40. She comes to Jesus, not to Mary. She comes to Jesus, her Lord. I want to emphasize that, her Lord. And she scolds him for encouraging Mary to be lazy. Underneath, she saw both Mary and Jesus as blocking her goal, which was to put together a wonderful meal. So she spoke with a real attitude when she came to the Lord, and she said, "Lord, don't you care that my sister has left me to do all the work by myself?" She was all caught up in herself. She believed that she had been wronged. And then she literally commanded Jesus to order Mary to get back to work. She insisted, she says, "Lord, tell her to help me." Jesus gently corrected her attitude. He wasn't angry. And he encouraged her to follow her sister Mary as an example. He said this, "Martha, Martha." Whenever a New Testament person says a name twice, it means both compassion and I've got something to say in rebuke to you. "Martha, Martha," the Lord answered, "you are worried and upset about many things. Mary has chosen what is best, and it will not be taken from her." I think what Martha needed to do was to re-examine her goal that was being blocked, and that she might see her self-centeredness and her selfishness that lay behind her anger. This is always the first step in diagnosing anger. You need to ask yourself, what goal is being blocked? What right is being violated that has made me so angry at someone? Jesus encouraged Martha to see her misplaced goals, or to look at them, and to follow Mary's example and sit at his feet. Whenever you are seated at Jesus' feet, you're doing well. The second symptom to which that an anger is ungodly, the second symptom is a vengeful spirit. Self-centered, sinful anger motivates us at times to get back at the person who has blocked our goal or violated our rights. And when we lash out at someone, as Martha did, you can be sure that it's sinful anger. There are all kinds of ways to get back at someone. I mean, a spunky person will usually resort to a clever insult or sarcasm, or give the person just a piece of her or his mind with scolding and rebuke, raising his voice or pointing one's finger and lecturing them in a punishing way. A different, softer tempered person will put on the silent treatment or act coldly towards the person who has angered him or her. All the while, the angry person is feeling justified and uncompassionate to this person she's angry with.